Hi everybody, and welcome back to Be Like Christ. In today's video, Matthew chapter 4 verses 13 through 22. Now when he heard that John had been arrested, he withdrew into Galilee. And leaving Nazareth, he went and lived in Capernaum by the sea, in the territory of Zebulun and Naphtali, so that what was spoken by the prophet Isaiah might be fulfilled. The land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, the way of the sea beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. The people dwelling in darkness have seen a great light, and for those dwelling in the region and shadow of death, on them a light has dawned. So at this point, Jesus leaves the place where he grew up at the city of Nazareth, and he goes to Galilee, to the city of Capernaum. And this prophecy that's mentioned here by Matthew is actually from the book of Isaiah, chapter 9, and it talks about the land of the Gentiles. And you think about that, why is Galilee considered the land of the Gentiles? That was originally part of the Promised Land. Israel, who inhabited that land, Zebulun and Naphtali, and 8 other tribes, they were taken away by the Assyrian Empire into captivity, never to return. And so when they were taken out of that land, Gentiles moved into the land. And eventually, when some of the Jews started to come back and to move around, some of the Jews went up there as well. And so it's fair to call the land of Galilee, at least for a time, the land of the Gentiles. The next verse says, "From that time Jesus began to preach, saying, 'Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand.'" And that's exactly what John was preaching back in Matthew chapter 3, verse 1. And then Jesus goes to find the 12 apostles. And he's going to call 4 apostles here. He's going to call Peter, Andrew, James, and John. While walking by the Sea of Galilee, he saw 2 brothers, Simon, who was called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And he said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." Immediately they left their nets and followed him, and going on from there he saw 2 other brothers, James the son of Zebedee, and John his brother, in the boat with Zebedee their father, mending their nets. And he called them. Immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. I think there are at least 3 lessons that we can get out of this text, probably many more. I think one really good lesson can be learned in the circumstances in which Jesus calls these brothers. For these brothers, this was just an ordinary day. They were getting up with their father, and they were going to go out and do fishing like they had watched their father do probably his whole life and their whole lives. They were going to get in their boat, they were going to fish, they were going to mend their nets, they were going to go home. It was just going to be a plain old ordinary day out on the Sea of Galilee. There is no indication that these brothers went out on the sea that day expecting their life to change forever. But that's what happened. Jesus comes trotting along the sea, and he calls out to these brothers and he says, "Hey, you, follow me." And I think there's a lesson there, especially in their response in following, even though they weren't expecting it. If you're like me, you like to have your whole life planned out. You know where you're going to go. You know all the facts. You know how you're going to get there. and maybe you even have a life planned out to do nothing but working for the Lord. Maybe you have a life planned out that is involved with secular work. Or you have goals and dreams of places you want to live, or cars you want to drive, or whatever it may be. But you have a plan, and you're sticking to that plan because in your mind, it all is perfect. And I think the lesson to be learned is that Jesus isn't always going to call you when you expect him to. Opportunities that come up in your life aren't always going to come when you expect them to, and when you're ready, and when you've done all the preparation, and when you know all the facts. Sometimes they're going to come on ordinary days that you never expected. It may be while you're at work, it may be while you're with the church, it may be while you're on the internet and you find an opportunity there that you never expected to see, and perhaps that opportunity is the most important opportunity of your life. And the lesson is you have to be ready when the opportunity comes. And that leads us into the second lesson, and that's the way that these men responded to the call of Jesus. Every single one of them said yes. And that was probably in the face of some pressure. That was in the face of them walking away from their jobs and their livelihood and their security, and even their father, James and John. They were, it says, in the boat with their father, and Jesus called them and they said, "See ya." I wonder, we're not told what Zebedee said to them, but it would be kind of odd just to walk away from your father in the middle of doing a job because you said, "I found something more important to do." That probably took some guts. And yet, they all went. And in our lives, I don't think it's hardly any different. Sometimes those opportunities come to us when we're not, all our ducks aren't in a row and we're not expecting it and we haven't sorted out all the difficulties that we have to get through to say yes and to follow Christ. But when we're in that situation, we've got to be able to say, like these 4 men did, "Nothing is going to get in my way of doing this greater thing." That no doubt was a difficult decision. And we always read that story about Peter asking Jesus to come out of the boat and to walk on the water, and we admire him for the faith that he had to do that. But that wasn't the first time anyone had walked out of the boat to Jesus. In this text, we've got 4 individuals who, when Jesus calls them, they step out of the boat and they follow him. So the lesson is, always be ready to take the opportunities that God puts in front of you. You might as well wake up every day and say, "Today might be the day." That takes us to our 3rd lesson then, and that lesson is that there are many ways that God can use each and every individual. For this lesson, I want to focus on just 2 of the brothers, James and John, and look at what Jesus does in this text, and then looking at the rest of the Bible, see how their lives turned out and how Jesus used them throughout this whole process. So notice these 2 brothers. They grew up with the same parents. They grew up in the same household. They may have even been about the same age, and they grew up in the same profession, and they did the same thing every day with their father. And Jesus even called them in the same call. Just one call for both of them. But when we look through the pages of the Bible and we look towards the end of their lives, we find something drastically different. And what's amazing is Jesus actually knew when he called them what he was calling them to. James would be probably the first apostle to be killed in the early church. In Acts chapter 12, we read about Herod who killed James, and James would become kind of a fire along with Stephen under the early church that said this conviction is real and we're willing to sacrifice for it. But his brother John had a very, very different role in the early church. John was probably the only apostle who wasn't martyred for the sake of Christ. John lived a long, long life. Even some people saying that he reached almost to 100 AD. And John's role in the early church wouldn't be to light the fire under the church like his brother, but it would be to sustain that flame. Through all the persecutions and through all the false teaching and through all the struggles, he would be the last surviving apostle sustaining that fire. Sometimes we look around and we look at people that we admire. I know that I've done it. And I say, wow, I wish my life could work out like his or like hers, and I could have the opportunities that they have, and I could have the talents that they have, and that people would look to me like they look to them. And I think that's a mistake, because sometimes we can even become a little bit jealous if our life doesn't work out that way. But just because our lives don't work out and look exactly like somebody else's doesn't mean that our lives aren't reaching their fullest potential. If anyone knows how to use somebody to their full potential, it's God. And He may have a very different role, but yet an equally glorifying role for you and your life versus somebody else and their life. So don't be discouraged, because you were made with unique abilities and with unique talents, and God can use you in unique ways. Now I'm going to give you a fourth lesson just because I feel like it at the end, and I don't want to let this text pass by without me giving it to you, because I see it when I look here. And that has to do with the way that these men responded. They all said yes, right? There isn't anybody in this text or in really any of the Gospels that when Jesus calls them to be one of His 12, they say, no. And it's the names of the men who said yes to Jesus' invitation that are written all over the Bible. And they got to participate, unbeknownst to them, in the greatest work that a man could be participating in while they were on the earth. That's why you read about their name in the book. So there's a few lessons there really for us. And one is that God can and is able to use whoever says yes to his invitation to get his work done. And the second lesson is that your name needs to be in the book. Now, it's a little too late to get your name in this book. It was finished about 2,000 years ago, and so you're probably not going to see your name right next to Peter, right next to Paul, anytime soon, even if you are a follower of God. But there is a book that God has, and we read about it in the scriptures, the book of life. And he says that if your name is in that book, then in the end, you will be with me for eternity. It is vitally important that you get your name in that book. And you do that by saying yes when Jesus comes asking, Luke, follow me. Or fill in your name, follow me. The answer is yes. It has to be yes. Thanks again for watching another video. If you like the video and you like the content on this channel, remember to subscribe, like the video, comment down below. I posted another video yesterday of a poem that I wrote, so check that out. It's based off of Romans chapter 8. And so thanks for watching again. I really appreciate it, and I hope this has been helpful to you. See ya!